Four women leaders of the party that split from Ortega's Sandinismo have been in solitary confinement for 9 months. They have not been allowed a book, a blanket. They sleep on concrete beds on a plastic mat with the light on day and night. In 9 months, these prisoners have only been allowed 6 family visits. Feeding is minimal. Each of them have lost between 20 and 30 pounds. The prison regime is in which they are kept is worthy of a Stalinist gulag. One of them, a hero of the revolution, Hugo Torres, who participated in a guerrilla operation to free, among other political prisoners, Daniel Ortega, died as a result of the unsanitary conditions in the prison. These prisoners were accused of undermining national integrity with no more evidence than Facebook and Twitter posts and some chats from the phones they seized. The witnesses were policemen. They did not have access to their lawyers except on the day of the trial, which, contrary to the judicial norms of the country, was held in the same prison and was not open to the press or to anyone other than one of their relatives. Innocent prisoners were sentenced to between 8 and 13 years in jail. Several of these people, 21 in fact, are over 60 years old. There was one prisoner who was 80, and he was finally allowed when Hugo Torres died to have house arrest. Last week, 4 musicians who gave a concert with protest music were arrested and deported from their own country. Parallel to these trials, the National Assembly has removed the legal status of more than 100 NGOs, among them the Nicaraguan Pen Center, of which I was president. More recently, I just found out that they also went after the association Ernesto Cardenal established to develop Solentiname, and also against the Arts Foundation Sergio Ramirez set up in Mazatepe, his hometown. Every day we hear of more and more repression. People are not allowed out of the country and their passports are confiscated. Exiled Nicaraguans are refused renewal of their passports. I left my house last May with just a suitcase with summer clothes to visit my daughters in the US when in June the regime began to jail candidates and journalists such as Miguel Mendoza, whose crimes whose crime was to write sharp tweets. When they went after my brother, I was told I was on a list and not to go back. So I am in exile again now, my second exile, except the first one. For the first one, I was 25 years old, and now I am in my 70s. So I wanted to read a poem to you of my situation, but it's also a situation of many, many of Nicaraguans who are exiled from their country. I have no place to live. No tengo donde vivir. I chose the word. Escogí las palabras. My books were left behind. My home, the garden, its hummingbirds, the massive palms named Bismarck for their imposing presence. I have no place to live. I chose the word to speak for those who are silenced, to understand a rage that nothing can appease. Every door is shut. I left the white sofas, the terrace, the dancing volcanoes in the distance, the lake's phosphorescent skin, night revealing the city's multicolored lights. I left carrying my words under my arm. They are my crime, my sin. Not even God could force me to recant. My dogs, Macondo and Caramelo, left behind. The sweet shape of their faces, their love from nose to tail. My bed with its mosquito net, the place to close my eyes and imagine a world transformed according to my wishes. It was not to be. It was not to be. I want to speak the future now, to speak my heart, throw up revulsion and disgust. My clothes idle in the closet, my shoes, the landscapes of my days and nights, the sofa where I write, the windows. I have taken to the streets with my words. I embrace them, I choose them, I am free, even if I have nothing. So, thank you very much. That's it.
Many thanks, Gionconda, for those moving words. And I think we need some comfort right now. So we are then clearing the stage for our eminent musicians. Janne Hellberg, okay. Matthias, and Roberto. Okay, the stage is yours.
Jag gillar att komma till Författarcentrum. Det är det mest bekväma scen man sitter på. Hej!
Hej!
Jag heter Roberto González. Som mitt namn säger eller kan ge intryck av är jag fransman. Med spanska föräldrar, republicanos. Janne Hellberg är mycket gammal vän, eller inte mycket gammal vän, men en gammal vänskap, eller hur? Jag har inte spelat på, jag vet inte, 30 år kanske? Ja, 20, okej. Och så Mattias, han var så här stor ungefär på den tiden. Och nu basar han här. Så.
Spelade salsa en gång i tiden.
Charanga Nueva heter gruppen. Kanske några av er har dansat till den musiken? Charanga. Okej, men nu ska vi sjunga några låtar. Ska vi börja med, det finns kanske folk som kan hjälpa oss, för jag menar, den sången har jag lärt mig nu. Men om det är någon som är från Nicaragua kan sjunga den här Nicaragua, Nicaraguita. Förrätt, jag måste ha en... Vi går tvåan, va?
Ay,
Nicaragüita, la flor más linda de mi querer. Abonada con la bendita Nicaragüita, te dirige. A Nicaragua sos más dulcita que la mielita de Jamagas. Pero ahora que ya sos libre Nicaragüita, te quiero mucho más. Pero ahora que ya sos libre Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Ay, Nicaragua, Nicaragüita, la flor más linda de mi querer. Abonada con la bendita Nicaragüita, sangre de Diriangé. Ay, Nicaragua, sos más dulcita que la mielita de Tamaga. Pero ahora que ya sos libre Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Pero ahora que ya sos libre Nicaragüita, yo te quiero mucho más. Exactamente.
Ja, det där var en låt som vi har lärt oss för denna föreställning. Jag skrev en sångbok med Nicaraguas sånger för 25 år sedan, kanske någonting sånt där, som gavs ut av UBV. Och där fanns ju den här låten inte med, men däremot fanns det en massa andra låtar. Vi ska ta en låt till senare, men först tänkte vi värma upp med någonting så vi kan utan till. Eller hur?
Ja, just det.
Det är en mexikansk grupp som heter Maná som har gjort den tillsammans med Carlos Santana.
Den handlar inte om politik. Den handlar bara om kärlek. Olycklig kärlek. Som är orsakad av en kvinna. Alltså det är väldigt opolitiskt korrekt kan man säga. Men den svänger för fan, ursäkta.
Det är kubansk inspirerad, alltså Guajira-sång fast den skrivet av mexikaner. Esa mujer me está matando.
espinado el corazón. Por más que trate de olvidarla, mi alma no da razón. Mi corazón aplastado, dolido y abandonado. A ver, tú sabes, dime mi amor, cuánto amor y qué dolor no quedó. Corazón espinado, cómo duele, mamá. Cómo me duele el amor. Corazón espinado. Cómo me duele el amor. Cómo duele el corazón cuando uno es bien entregado. Pero no olvide, mujer, que algún día dirás, ay, 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 cómo me duele el amor. Corazón espinado, cómo duele, mamá. Cómo me duele el amor. Un poquito de solo, por favor, ya vamos ya. Matías. Cómo me duele el olvido. Cómo me duele el amor. Cómo me duele estar vivo sin tenerte a un lado, amor. Corazón espinado. Corazón espinado, ay, 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 corazón, ay, mi corazón espinado, ay, mi corazón espinado, corazón espinado, ay, corazón espinado. Gracias, Belli.
Ja, vi tänkte ta en sång av Carlos Mejia Godoy som heter Cuando venga la paz.
Ya, ¿cuándo vendrá la paz? Yo no sé si ha habido paz jamás en esta tierra. Cuando los dinosaurios, a lo mejor. Pero tampoco eran muy simpáticos los unos con los otros, digamos. Así que jag måste prata svenska kanske. Jag har lärt mig den där sången ungefär så att jag kommer att göra massor med misstag. För jag behöver hjälp av ni som kan de där sångerna. Men vi försöker att göra det bästa vi kan. Eller hur? Cuando venga la paz, amor, cuando venga la paz, reirá la pradera, amor, cuando venga la paz, la carreta del peón callará su gemido y cantarán los ríos. Cuando venga la paz, cuando venga la paz, amor, cuando venga la paz, reirá la pradera, amor, cuando venga la paz, la carreta del peón callará su gemido y cantarán los ríos cuando venga la paz. Cuando se llenarán de flores los caminos y una eterna alegría nuestro pueblo tendrá. Cuando sea el poder de obreros y campesinos, yo te podré querer con plena libertad. Viviremos amor, amor en la montaña. Vamos a envejecer cargado de hijos, entonces te amaré por la noche, te amaré como ayer, cuando nos conocimos. Cuando venga la paz, amor, cuando venga la paz, reirá la pradera, amor, cuando venga la paz. La carreta del peón callará sus gemidos y cantarán los ríos cuando venga la paz. Cuando venga la paz, llenarán de flores los caminos y una eterna alegría nuestro pueblo tendrá. Cuando sea el poder de obreros y campesinos, yo te podré querer con plena libertad. Viviremos amor, amor en la montaña. Vamos a envejecer cargados de hijos. Entonces te amaré por la noche, te amaré como ayer, cuando nos conocimos. Det var en tolkning av den där sången. Tack så mycket. Ja, det var väl allt vi hade, eller? Va? Så lite? Ja. Vill ni höra en till, eller?
Ja, det är en låt som Roberto har skrivit själv.
Ja, alldeles själv. Det heter Cholitai. Av kärlek igen.
Kubansk sång. Eller?
Jag vet inte, jag är en smelting pot av vad som helst. Så, men det heter Cholitai, ni vet vad Cholita betyder? Så, behöver inte jag förklara. Ven conmigo, ven, mi Cholitai. Ahí en la playa el mar nos espera. Ven conmigo, el sol nos guiará. Y la marea nos columpiará. Y las pasiones nos perseguirán. Ven conmigo, Cholitai. Ven mi flor de magnolia. Ven conmigo, Cholitai. Ven mi flor de magnolia. A su sombra besa mi Cholitai. Y en tu pelo voy a susurrar que de mis sueños tú eres la dueña. Y en tu ven conmigo, Cholitai, que de mis problemas ven conmigo, Cholitai. Ven mi flor de magnolia. Ven conmigo, Cholitai. Ven mi flor de magnolia. Ven conmigo, ven mi Cholitai. Ven conmigo, ven mi Cholitai. Ay, ven conmigo, ven a la playa a gozar. Ay, ven a bailar. En mi patio crece un gran magnolia. A su sombra te sacaré a bailar. Y en tu pelo voy a susurrar que de mis sueños tú eres la dueña. Vamos ya. Ven conmigo, ven mi cholita. Ven conmigo, ven mi cholita. Ven conmigo, ven mi cholita. Ven conmigo, ven. Ay, 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 ay. Hay que poner un poquito de flamenco. Ay, mi cholita. Ay, 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 ay. Tack så mycket. Gracias por su paciencia.
Fantastic music, wasn't it? Thanks a lot, Janne, Mattias, and Roberto. Somebody fix the sound, maybe? Yeah, thanks. Okay, so we have now reached one of the key moments of this event, a panel discussion or a panel session with Gionconda Belli. And we have a panel that will range wide and far and wide, and hopefully also deep, on the situation in Nicaragua and what we here on the outside, so to say, can do to support the struggle for democracy and freedom of expression. Please, Gionconda, have a seat. We'll try to arrange it for you over there. And we also welcome Jesper Bengtsson, President of the Swedish PEN, who's going to take part in the panel, and Eva Zetterberg, as well, former ambassador of Sweden to Nicaragua, and very active in these contexts, and Erik Halkjær, President of Reporters Without Borders, Swedish chapter. Most welcome, all of you. ¿Dónde prefieres? En medio, perfecto, ya. You want to help? Okay. Are you comfortable like that, Erik? Yeah? Okay. Good. Okay. Perfect. So, well, there are many topics to address and discuss, but let's not forget the realm of literature and poetry. And I happen to know that you, Eva, you have been doing a second reading of certain of Gionconda's books, and that reading has produced certain questions. So let's hear from you to start.
We know that there is unfortunately only one book translated to Swedish by Gionconda Belli, but I would have liked to have this fantastic book also translated, El País Bajo Mi Piel. That was one of my best introductions to come to Nicaragua. It is published in the year 2000, but it covers her whole life from the beginning to the year 2000. And reading it before going and working in Nicaragua, it gave me a lot to understand what had happened and the revolution and so forth. But now, rereading it, I came upon many parts where I could see all the fantastic enthusiasm for the revolution, the dedication of yourself and a lot of other people, what make the alphabetization campaign and all the rest, everything that you wanted to transform your country. But also already in 2000 and already just shortly after the revolution, and I think during the revolution itself, you started to feel quite critical about the authoritarian way of handling criticism, or the way that the diversity of opinions was crushed and so forth. And I came to one, just to quote one thing, and then we'll take other themes. The way to act by the revolution became harder and harder along the way, when the economically powerful groups and the extreme left questioned the revolutionary reforms, some because it affected their economic interest and others because they wanted more radical changes. The answer was not to consider the criticism, but to exclude them and exceptionally put them in jail. Already at that time, the authoritariety was unfortunately our heritage. And reading that, I feel very sad also to see that the words that you pronounced at that time has come so true and even more today. So my question to you now, Gionconda, is also when you reflect back, could you ever imagine that you would come to the situation that you have today? That is my first question. And then we all have a lot of other questions.
Well, I began to imagine that we could come to the situation that we have today when Daniel Ortega was elected. You know, I worked in the campaign to defeat Ortega in 2007 because I worked with Herty Levites and the MRS. And I remember telling somebody, if Ortega gets elected, we are never going to get rid of him. Because I have been keeping a very close watch on Ortega since he became president. I had a blog in the Nuevo Diario, a newspaper in Nicaragua, and I kept writing, and I could see that he was, concentrating power, more power, more power. And I remember telling somebody, this is not a dictadura, it's a dicta blanda for a while. But I said, now if Daniel Ortega gets up one day in a bad mood and he wants to screw us all, he has everything in his hand to do it. And that's what happened. I mean, they completely since the beginning begin to accumulate power. And that was, another thing that I found in this case, he was not as exclusionary, because in the revolution we tend to exclude it. We were very young, we were very lefty, and we wanted the dictatorship of the proletariat in some way. And I think that was a big fault of the revolution that cost us a lot of problems. And so, but this time, this new Daniel Ortega, not new, he really hasn't changed. I think what has changed are the circumstances. I think Daniel Ortega, like a psychologist said to me, no, he didn't change. He was like that. But he was, surrounded by people who wouldn't let him do what he's doing now. And now that he pushed to us all out, all guard of the Sandinistas, except for a few people, were pushed out. So he was able to rule in the way that he was. He's a person who has not evolved politically.
I can just add to that I must say that myself, I was in Nicaragua in 2006 and 2007 and 2008 I left, and watching the process. And I can just admit that we were very naive, a lot of us, because we talked to Ortega, we talked to all the other people, and were assured that things would go on, they would respect democratic rights, they would respect people, and they would let a lot of people continue working in government and so forth, not changing all the equipment that is the tradition in most Latin American countries to change after a political change. And I must admit, I believed him. I thought that he had changed, that during the years he had learned to respect democratic rights. But I understand, we were wrong, you were right, unfortunately. Anyway, I think I have a lot of more questions, but I'll hand over to Jesper.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about freedom of expression and the conditions today for writers and journalists in Nicaragua. Jesper, you have a long experience from PEN International's work in relation to countries where freedom of expression has been trampled upon. And Gionconda was the president of PEN Nicaragua from 2013 until you yourself closed it down because it was impossible to continue working in 2021. So I guess you have a whole series of questions. Just over to you.
First, to make a short comment on the same topic as you talked about, because I think it's very interesting to see. First of all, I must say that I am probably the person in this room who knows the least about Nicaragua. I think all of you knows probably more. It's a very big echo here or something. Well, anyway, I was very interested in the development in Nicaragua many years ago when I was politically active in the 80s. The first thing I actually did when I became member of the Social Democratic Youth in Sweden was to collect money for a Sandinist school in Nicaragua. This was back in 1982 or something, I think. And it was a very big issue in Sweden. But somehow, I think Sweden, not you in here, of course, but Sweden in general, lost interest at a certain point. And it became other countries, other conflicts, other problems that became on top of the agenda. But what you can see now, when you see the films and when you hear your description, is that the mechanism for authoritarianism in Nicaragua and for the repression of freedom of speech is the same as in so many other countries. And because you see that they never, the dictators or the people who's becoming dictators, they never do it in one step. They take it step by step, and they use the same kind of arguments, nationalistic arguments, or reference to old fights, like they do in Nicaragua. And they talk about foreign agents. They close down the civil society with arguments that they are foreign agents and not really a part of the true country, the true national spirit, or whatever it might be, or the true religion in some countries. But when you actually say that you saw it coming and you warned for it, would you say that is there ways for us to actually become more aware of the risks? Because I think we make the same mistake all over, every time it happens. We made it with Russia as well now. We didn't realize that how bad it was until it was terribly bad. And in a way, the same with Nicaragua.
Yeah, I recommend you read a book called How to Lose Your Country. Yeah. It's Esete Mulkaran from Turkey. And she has an amazing portrait of what happened in Turkey, you know, with Erdogan, and how everybody wanted to believe that this, you know, when he began to organize his party, everybody thought, you know, they are not important, they are, you know, not intellectual, they are not this, they are not that. And it began to, they began to take more and more and more power. I think what happened in Nicaragua was that what Eva is saying, people were very trusting of Daniel Ortega at the beginning because everybody wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt that he had changed. He made enough gestures of change. He signed documents saying he was going to respect freedom of expression. And I think something went very wrong in his head and his wife's head when people revolted, because I think they thought people loved them. And when they saw that people were really against, you know, these masses of people, I mean, Rosario Murillo has been telling everybody that it's a coup d'etat. How can you say that's a coup d'etat? You know, that's a people demonstrating. And I think the spark was when they began to kill kids. I mean, people like kind of revived the whole repression of the Somoza dictatorship and said no more. And we are not going to allow another dictatorship. And that's when they rebelled. And it was a pacific rebellion. I mean, it wasn't, nobody had weapons, you know. They had those morteros, that is something that is used in folkloric feasts, which makes a lot of noise. Some people had, you know, one gun or two guns. I mean, it wasn't like nobody had any guns, but very few. And they went all against this rebellion. And so they reacted in a most horrific way. And that's, for me, very hard to understand. And what they are doing now, it for me, it's kind of like they are pathologically psychotic. No, and I am not I am not just saying this because when you think about, what the cruelty of how they are dealing with people in jail, it's really such horrible stuff. When the people revolted, they forbid the hospitals to attend to the kids who were wounded in the protests. I mean, and when doctors defied that order and they attended to the kids, 400 doctors were fired. So in Nicaragua, such a little country, 400 doctors to fire so many people. I mean, and you think this is crazy. This cannot be the mind of somebody who wants the best for their country, and um, they are just decided to hold on to power at whatever cost. And I think that's, we in society are very trusting, and we don't fight enough when we start seeing these things. Like, I think the right in Europe and everywhere else is, going above and going up. And I don't think that the left or the center are fighting enough the right. So fight.
Because you can also see that the arguments, actually, I made that comparison as well when I thought about this. The arguments from a lot of the nationalistic right in Europe sounds a bit like the arguments from people like Daniel Ortega. But the methods are, of course, still different, but still the kind of ideological framework is very similar.
Any questions from the audience so far on this topic? Freedom of expression, conditions in Nicaragua? Yes, go ahead. If you hold on a second, you will get a microphone. Okay, you'll be moving, fine.
Yes, with everything said about Ortega and his wife, my question is, why do people still support him after everything? I have family in Nicaragua also, and they say it's still a really strong support for the regime and everything they say. They really believe him. I feel it's, with everything that's happened, it's a bit hard to understand why do his supporters still be so strong for him. Thank you.
But it has gone down, the support, substantially. I mean, it was very funny because in Nicaragua, people lied to what is they are called, the Reporteros?
The ballot makers.
Yeah, like before the rebellion in 2018, it was in April, the what is it called, the Seed Gallup, which is a very important firm that does surveys and asks people things. they asked people what they thought of Ortega, and 70% said they were with him. After April, 70% said they were against him. So I think people are very afraid to say the truth. That's one thing. And the support is not, has completely diminished after this April. But people are telling they do not trust the people who come to ask them. You know, in a regime like that, you are afraid that they are going to give you away. And so I think people pretend that they support because they need it. For example, you know, they were giving at the beginning with the money that Hugo Chavez gave to the country, they gave zinc roofing, and people would go even if they didn't support the government because they wanted the things that they were giving them. Yeah, but some people are very loyal to Ortega also. There is a very deep bond with Sandinismo in Nicaragua. And Sandinismo means a lot to people, to, you know, some people. And a lot of Sandinistas left Sandinismo when this rebellion happened because they were horrified at what was going on. But that's, you know, there is also that loyalty to Ortega that has all this reminiscing of our revolution that was such a important part of our lives.
But then you're talking about the older generation, Gionconda, or also
Well,
among
the
the
older,
youth?
and they have some, you know, Rosario Murillo has organized all these young people, and they give them scholarships and this and the other, and they are very fanatic, some of them.
But I guess that's also why they have to control media and control people writing and people speaking, because as in, once again, if you make a comparison to other states like this, I mean, that's what happens because they need to control what's true and what's not. And that's what they have done, as far as I understand it. Yeah. So I guess that's one reason as well.
And on that point, let's invite Eric Halker then, when it comes to media and journalists. Oh, two microphones. You can talk in stereo then. Okay. So because Gallup polls and media and so on, it's all about communication and the perception and what you really get to know about what is actually happening in the country and what do people think. So what are the conditions for journalists in the country, and where do people get trustworthy information from today, if they do? Eric, you've been to Nicaragua many times, you know the country, and recently you visited exiled journalists in Costa Rica. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to comment on this last thing that you said. When I was in Nicaragua in 2019, I met some of the university students who were released after being imprisoned after the protests. And some of them told me that when they were in prison, they called home to their parents. But the parents said, I don't want to talk to you. I can't have a relationship with you, because they were so afraid of losing their jobs or having repercussions from the regime that they went so far to push away their own children. So it was a very tough, when I realized how tough it was. And I guess it's still like that. But coming back to your question, Pierre, also one of the first persons who got shot in these protests was the journalist Angel Gaona in Bluefields, 21st of April. After that, it was an execution style. He was shot with one bullet in his head. And all of his colleagues, there were a group of 20, 40 independent journalists, comunicadores. They decided to form a group of journalists to try and help each other or cover each other's backs. And that was the seed to an organization now called Periodistas y Comunicadores Independientes Nicaragua, independent Nicaraguan journalists and communication workers. I met that group in Colombia 2018, and I thought this will not this will be very difficult. They are so under pressure in Nicaragua. Today, 4 years later, there are 175 journalists. 120 are in exile in Costa Rica. They still have more or less 40 anonymous journalists working sort of undercover in Nicaragua. And some are also living in the States or in Mexico and Spain. So there are absolutely ways of getting information in and out of the country, the journalistic work, photos. They were doing a story now about the environmental protection of the San Juan, Rio San Juan. And that's a big story being published on the internet, but with no names, of course. And it's done completely in Nicaragua. We have to also remind us, Nicaragua looks or sounds a lot like Belarus or Russia or Ukraine, but Daniel Ortega can't shut off the internet. He doesn't control the social media. So you can still use Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp, whatever. And you can have all these phone companies, of course, some of them are controlled by the family. But it is still fairly easy to get information in and out of the country, but it's very difficult. But I would like to sort of...
These films are examples of that.
Exactly, and it's of course done by, in Costa Rica. But I would like to pose a question to you, Gionconda. How would you suggest that we help? How can we help? I mean, we, Reporters Without Borders, are helping PISIN, this organization, but they're still in Costa Rica. How can we help people in Nicaragua?
It's very hard. But I think you should have people in Costa Rica for the time being. Because right now, what I see is that the fear is ruling Nicaragua. And people are so scared. And because, they lose their jobs, they are put into jail. I mean, there was a kid who is in jail now and has been in jail for a while, who was just standing with a flag, Nicaraguan flag, and up on the street, and he was taken to jail. Then they accused him of drug traffic, and that's what they do. They plant drugs, or they just say that they're drug trafficking and weapons and whatever. The judicial system is not existent, non-existent. It's completely decided. Everything is decided by the couple, and so that you have no recourse whatsoever. The Supreme Court is controlled by Sandinistas. Everything is. But what was I saying about the the fact that we have the social media has been like an outlet. We are afraid that one of the things that began the revolt was they began talking about controlling social media, and also that was people were so enraged, and young people especially. And so I think social media has been an outlet, and journalists have been very heroic in taking the digital world and using it. But of course, the problem is that in Nicaragua, the digital world is not accessible to the people in the countryside. It's only urban, in the urban cities, and not for everybody. But the social media has been super important. It still is very important. We have not had it controlled like they do in Cuba, etc. That's why we have been able to continue the resistance.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, Eva, yeah, go ahead.
May I continue the question from Eric? Because thinking about civil society and a broader way of also helping people in Nicaragua, we know that civil society is almost crushed, that, like you were saying, 100 organizations or more are denied their legal status, etc. So there are very few left to really act. So my question is, we also know that quite a lot of the international organizations have been protesting. We have from European Union, United Nations, the OIS, etc. So many have reacted, and they have pronunciations, declarations, and so forth. And of course, that puts them really to be feel really ashamed of what they're doing. But I was thinking, to what help can it be? What more can be done? Also, our help to civil society, but also to really enforce the international organizations to make a change. So, what do you think about what the outside world really can do to help political prisoners and their families, of course, but also to change the political situation?
Well, there is one thing that can be done is a fund to help, the families, because many families are in very difficult situations. Then the talking about Nicaragua, because, like you were saying, it's not enough. The information is very, it's not flowing adequately about Nicaragua, because there are so many other things that compete with a little country like Nicaragua. But you can push. There is something to be done, and the civil society, I think, has to connect to people in exile. I really think that to do it in Nicaragua right now, it's almost impossible, because the moment you have, as like an NGO helping, they have to register like foreign agents. They locked that channel of support for the civic society in Nicaragua. That's why PEN had to close in Nicaragua, because they told us you have to register like a foreign agent, and if you register, you lose all your political rights as a citizen because you are a foreign agent. So PEN, for example, would not have been able to continue its work denouncing the violations of the freedom of expression for journalists, which was what we were doing, denouncing what was going on. We kept doing it because there are always ways. In Nicaragua, we produce still to this day a little uh, like a page every week. It's called Eye on Nicaragua, and it's been taken by several PEN England, PEN Mexico, PEN Argentina. It's reproduced by them, and that's a way to keep track only about violations of for freedom of expression. But that's another way, that can be. But it's, I think, helping the exile community. If we think about the 80s, a lot of the work that helped the revolution inside was done outside. And so we have to follow a little bit of that model. And, the thing is that there are many, many people outside that are willing to work, but they need help.
Thank you so much, all of you. And I think this that you mentioned, Gionconda, about setting up a kind of a humanitarian fund that easily and non-bureaucratically, but in a very trustworthy manner, could actually provide resources for the political prisoners and their family members, because we very often maybe forget about the family members. Many of them are suffering quite a lot, and many of them do not have even the economic resources, not to talk about other resources needed in the situation which they now are trying to survive and also support their loved ones in prison. I think that initiative is coming up rather soon. I've heard about it in several spaces, and we hope it actually will gain traction. This then moves us towards the last part of our agenda tonight, and it relates to a year-long campaign by PEN Sweden called 12 Silenced Voices, because when talking about what we could do here and in the outside world, so to say, whether we are in exile or not, in solidarity with Nicaragua, then this is an initiative which so far has generated quite some public attention when it comes to other adopted silenced voices. And we will now get some interesting news from the PEN campaign. Most welcome, Elizabeth Löfgren, who is the coordinator for the campaign.
Can you hear me? You can't see me over there, can you? I'll stand here instead. Is that okay? My name is Elizabeth Löfgren. No, okay. I'm the chair of the Writers in Prison Committee, and he's my boss. Swedish PEN will turn 100 years in September this year. To highlight this, we launched a campaign in October. It's a campaign with one case each month, and we started off with Osman Kavala in Turkey, and we will go around the world. And today we are launching the case of Miguel Mendoza. We are cooperating with the libraries around Sweden who use our material. We have a text, a personal text about introduction about the person, and also a case description. And when you leave this room, I hope you will sign our appeal letter. This letter is addressed to Daniel Ortega in Managua, Nicaragua. And now I will say a few words about the case. I contacted Gionconda and asked for a suitable one to use this month, and she came up with Miguel Mendoza. Miguel has worked as a sports journalist, not very interested in politics, I think. He's been very much into sports. And then after what happened in April 2018, he became very upset and he started using social media. He started tweeting and posted texts on Facebook. He was a very smart and very sharp author of these texts. So he gained a lot of interest. I think when he had 27,000 followers on Twitter and almost 120,000 followers on Facebook, which is quite good considering that he had no platform like this before. On 21st of June last year, he visited a friend in Managua when there were some police came without an arrest warrant. They took him away. They searched his house and but did not tell his wife or daughter where they had taken him. It took 72 days before they were found out that he had been brought to the infamous prison, El Chipote prison. And he's been there now since June last year, and we've heard the descriptions about horrifying conditions in the prison. He is in a cell which measures 2 times 2 meters, either in total darkness or 24-hour a day, very strong light. He's been on a starvation diet, so he has lost 30 pounds of weight. He has no writing material, no material to read, nothing to read, and he's in solitary confinement. He's been tortured, I think, at least very severely ill-treated, and most of all, they're trying to break him down psychologically. So this is the treatment. He's one of, I think, 177 prisoners right now, political prisoners, and he's a very strong case, and we are now going to campaign for him for a month, and we will follow, after a month, we will of course follow his case even more. He was sentenced in February. He went to prison behind closed doors on the 8th of February this year, and I think his lawyer was allowed not to meet him before, but he was allowed inside on the trial day. He was sentenced to conspiracy to undermine national integrity, disseminating false news. this is a conviction which is so familiar in other dictatorships, I would say. We've heard it before. And then a few days later, on the 16th, he was sentenced to 9 years imprisonment. I will stop there and I will beg you to sign our letter so we can send it to Ortega. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Do you want to comment and tell us a little bit more about Miguel Gionconda?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Ben, for doing this. It's very important for us and for Miguel. Miguel is a super nice person. You know, I cannot say very much about him besides what you just said, because he was just a sports reporter, and he began to write these tweets, and people loved his tweets because they were very, some of them were humorous. They would make fun of Ortega and Murillo, and also he had a sharp political intuition, and so his tweets were very popular, and people followed him, and especially young people. And so it was, I couldn't believe that they had taken him to jail. I mean, it was so outrageous. That man hadn't done anything that would merit 9 years in prison. Can you imagine? I mean, it's just the most unexplainable for me that he's in prison. He's a very charming guy. He was, one of these very loved sports reporters, baseball in Nicaragua being the sports that everybody, it's our national sport, besides poetry. In Nicaragua, everybody writes poetry. So, so that's what I can say. I really thank you, as a Nicaraguan, for doing this. Pen is, for me, I love pen. I mean, I have seen so many things done by pen. I was so happy that we were able to do a lot. We did a lot for Nicaragua journalism when we were able to do it. And still now, as I said, we do this Eye on Nicaragua. I'm sorry about my English is degenerating very quickly because when I get tired, I can't hold it anymore.
Okay, muchas gracias, Gionconda. Thanks a lot. So you can sign the letter. You can all, if you wish, sign the letter to Daniel Ortega. It's outside here. But before that, I think that Vivica and Anna from PEN and also the Swedish Authors Federation, they do have an invitation to all of you. Microphone.
Well, this is not an invitation. This is just a very big thank you to you, Gionconda, for coming and sharing so much. So some flowers for you, beautiful as you. Thank you so much. And a big applause for Gionconda.
We also want to take this opportunity to thank you, everyone who came here tonight and everyone who's watching. We hope the sound has been okay. Thank you so much to the network. Warm thank you to Vivica, and thank you to Reporteros Utan Gränser for this collaboration. Also, thank you to Palme Centros, who's been collaborating with us for this event and for your visit here. Many thanks to this very interesting panel, to the musician, to David, who's broadcasting this, and to Författarbundet, who has given us the space for this. And with that said, I think we want to welcome you all for a glass of wine and some chips. So thank you so much. Tack ska ni ha.